My name is Haley Norwood. I'm 32 years old, a certified occupational therapist working at a rehabilitation clinic in Boise, Idaho. I drive a sensible Honda Civic, I meal prep on Sundays, and I have a 6-year-old daughter named Wren who thinks caterpillars are the most interesting creatures on Earth. That's my life. That's what I built, piece by piece, after everything fell apart. But before I tell you what happened at my grandmother's funeral last March, you need to understand something. For 8 years, I was the family's silent wallet. Not because I was rich. Because I said yes every single time they asked. My younger sister stood up at the reception dinner, tapped her wine glass like she was about to give a toast, looked straight at Wren sitting quietly next to me, and said, "It's a little inappropriate that you even brought her here. She's not really one of us, is she?" Then she slid the bread basket to the other side of the table, away from my daughter, in front of 30 people. Wren looked up at me with those big brown eyes, not fully understanding, but feeling every bit of it. I put my hand on my daughter's back and said, quietly, calmly, the kind of calm that only comes when something inside you has finally completely broken. Everyone in this room will get exactly what they've earned. My sister laughed. My mother looked away. My uncle nodded like my sister had said something reasonable. I picked up Wren's coat, took her hand, and we walked out of that banquet room at the Riverside Inn in downtown Boise while 40 people watched us go. I didn't look back, but I knew with absolute certainty that things were about to change in ways my family wasn't ready for. I drove through the March slush on Highway 55 with Wren asleep in her car seat before we even hit the on-ramp. She'd worn herself out being perfectly behaved all day at a funeral, something no 6-year-old should ever have to do. I kept one hand on the wheel and let the other one rest where she could reach it as she woke up. My grandmother had been the only person in that family who ever looked at Wren and saw just a child. She'd send birthday cards with $10 bills folded inside and little notes written in her loopy cursive. For something sweet, little bug, Wren kept every single one in a shoebox under her bed. So yes, I was grieving. But what got scraped out of me at that dinner table was something older and deeper than grief. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner off Fairview Avenue and just sat there with the engine running and the heat on. I called my friend Kendall. She's a social worker. She's heard everything, and she picks up on the third ring no matter what time it is. "Tell me," she said. So I did. All of it. Not just tonight, but all 8 years of it. The $4,200 I sent when my mother's transmission blew out and she couldn't make rent. The $7,500 I wired to my sister when she and her then-boyfriend wanted to open a boutique that lasted 4 months. The $1,800 for my cousin's dental work. The pattern of calls that always started the same way. "I hate to ask, but you're the responsible one." As if responsibility was something they could borrow from me whenever they needed it and return whenever they felt like it. Kendall didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Haley, they don't call you responsible, they call you available. There's a difference." I sat with that for a long moment. "I'm done," I said. "Yeah," she said. "I know. You've been done for a while. You're just finally saying it out loud." I went home that night, and after I got Wren into bed and read her 2 chapters of her book and listened to her tell me very important facts about monarch butterflies, I sat down at my kitchen table and I wrote a single text to my mother. "I won't be sending money anymore. Not to you. Not to Amber. Not to anyone. This is effective now." I turned my phone face down and went to sleep for the first time in years without checking it before I closed my eyes. By 7 the next morning, I had 41 messages. My mother, whose name is Connie, went through every stage in about 90 minutes. First came the confusion. "What do you mean? Did something happen?" Then, the guilt trip. "Your grandmother would be devastated to see you doing this." Then, the accusation. "You've always thought you were better than us." Then, when none of that worked, the escalation. She called my Aunt Janet. Janet called me. Janet is the family's soft-voiced enforcer, the one who delivers the hard messages in a gentle tone so everyone can pretend there was no threat. "Honey, your mother is really struggling right now. You know how she gets when she's grieving. Maybe just give it a few days before you make any big decisions," I said. "It's not a decision I'm making. It's a decision I already made." Janet paused. "She's going to tell people you know. About you and Wren." "Tell them what?" I asked. Silence. Then just, You know how she talks. I did know, so I braced for it. My mother's version of nuclear warfare is her Facebook feed. She's had the same profile photo since 2019, and she has 847 friends, most of whom are neighbors, church acquaintances, and former coworkers who haven't spoken to her in a decade, but who will absolutely like and comment on a vague grief post at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. By noon, she posted, "When you bury your mother and your own child abandons you the same week, God sees everything." The comments rolled in. "So sorry, Connie. Prayers. Some people just don't understand family." One woman I'd met exactly twice at a Christmas party sent me a direct message that said, "I heard what you did. Shame on you." I read it, set my phone on my desk, and went back to my afternoon session with a patient who was relearning how to button his shirt after a stroke. I focused on his hands, on the small, real, meaningful work in front of me. My sister Amber called that evening. She didn't start with guilt. She started with entitlement, which, honestly, I respected more because at least it was honest. "You can't just pull the rug out," she said. "I have a car payment due in 2 weeks. You know I've been between jobs. Amber, you've been between jobs for 14 months? That's not fair. The car payment isn't my responsibility. You're seriously gonna let me lose my car over some little drama at a dinner party?" I thought about Ren's face, the breadbasket sliding away from her in front of a room full of people. The way she looked up at me to check if she was supposed to cry. "Yes," I said. "I am." She hung up. 2 weeks after the funeral, I was eating lunch at my desk when my colleague Nadia walked in and closed the door behind her. Nadia handles billing and insurance for our clinic, and she has the kind of precise, methodical mind that notices when something is slightly off in a number or a signature. She set a printed document in front of me. "I was helping you cross-reference your benefits enrollment update," she said carefully, "and I noticed something." I looked at the paper. It was a credit inquiry. My name. My social security number. A personal loan application submitted 8 months ago to a regional credit union I'd never used for $12,000. "That's not mine," I said. "I know," Nadia said. "The mailing address listed is your mother's house." The room went very quiet. I could hear the heating system running, the distant sound of a patient doing exercises in the gym down the hall. My mother had used my identity to apply for a $12,000 loan. My name. My credit. My social security number that she'd had access to since I was a child and had apparently never thought to misuse until I stopped being useful to her in the way she preferred. I'd given her everything. Money when she asked, time when she needed it, patience when she tested it, and when I finally said no, her response was to take from me anyway, just without my knowledge this time. I drove to my Aunt Janet's house that evening, not to report to the family or ask permission. I went because Janet had always known things she pretended not to know, and I needed to see her face when I showed her what I'd found. I laid the documents on her kitchen table. She looked at them for a long time. "I didn't know about this," she said finally. "But you're not surprised," I said. She didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I'm reporting it," I said. "I wanted you to know because I'm not doing it to hurt anyone. I'm doing it because it's a federal crime, and it's on my credit, and I'm not carrying it." Janet looked old suddenly. She said, "Haley, if you report her, she did this." I said, "Not me." I filed a report with the Federal Trade Commission that night through identitytheft.gov. Then I called the credit union, explained the situation, and submitted my documentation, my actual address history, a copy of my ID, proof that I'd been a resident of my apartment in Boise since before the application date, bank records showing I'd never received those funds. The fraud department opened an investigation immediately. Then I went home and read Ren 2 chapters of her butterfly book and fell asleep on her floor with a stuffed elephant on my face. The next morning, my mother called 7 times before 8 o'clock. I didn't answer. She switched to texts. "Haley, please. It was only supposed to be temporary. I was going to pay it back. Then, you're going to destroy this family. Then, I am your mother. Then, I hope you're proud of yourself." My sister weighed in around noon. "I can't believe you're doing this to Mom. She is grieving." "What is wrong with you?" I turned my read receipts off and put both of them on Do Not Disturb. My mother posted on Facebook again. This one was longer. It talked about ungrateful children and how she'd sacrificed everything and how no one in this life treats you worse than the people you love most. It got 63 likes. A woman from her church wrote, "This breaks my heart, Connie. You deserve better." My old high school principal, who has clearly never met me as an adult and has no context for anything, commented, "Sending love and prayers." Kendall texted me a screenshot with 3 question marks. I replied, "It's fine, let her talk." And I meant it, because here's what I'd learned. Finally, at 32, the people who would believe my mother's version without asking me didn't actually know me. And the people who knew me weren't asking. 6 weeks after I filed the report, a fraud investigator from the credit union called me at work. "Ms. Norwood," she said, "we've completed our investigation. The evidence clearly supports fraudulent application of credit in your name. We're referring the matter to the district attorney's office and removing the account from your credit file entirely." I had to step out into the clinic's small courtyard to take the call. The March cold had finally started softening into something closer to April. There was a tulip coming up in the planter by the door that I hadn't planted and didn't expect. "Thank you," I said. "That was all I could manage." "You did everything right," the investigator said. "You're protected." I sat on the bench for a few minutes after I hung up. I thought about the fact that my mother had my social security number, my birthday, my full legal name memorized since the day I was born, and had used all of it to take something from me after I stopped letting her take things from me directly. I thought about the 30 years of choosing her comfort over my own, of saying yes when I meant no, of writing checks to patch holes she'd created herself, and then staying quiet when she treated my daughter like an inconvenience. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. And underneath the tired, something else. A quiet, solid thing that I realized after a moment was self-respect. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. The news got around fast, as it does in the kind of overlapping social circles where everyone goes to the same 3 churches and the same 2 grocery stores. A cousin called me, not to yell, just to say he'd heard, and to ask if I was okay. My Aunt Janet stopped posting supportive comments on my mother's Facebook statuses. Amber went quiet on social media entirely, which for Amber was the equivalent of a distress signal. I heard through the cousin that my mother had hired a criminal defense attorney, that the loan had gone mostly to pay credit card debt and a few months of her mortgage, that Amber had to sell her car, not because I let her, but because the payments were hers to make. My mother sent one more letter, handwritten, on the kind of notepaper she'd always kept in the kitchen drawer, the kind with a little floral border. She'd sent me birthday cards on that paper in my whole life. I recognized the handwriting before I even looked at the return address. It said, essentially, that I had destroyed the family, that I was cruel, that I'd forgotten where I came from, and that when I was old and alone, I would regret this. I read it once, then I put it in my paper recycling. Not dramatically, just as a fact. I blocked her number. I blocked Amber. I updated my emergency contacts at work, at Ren's school, at my doctor's office. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy. These aren't cinematic moments, they're just paperwork. But paperwork is how you actually draw a line. That spring, Kendall introduced me to someone. Not romantically. Just a person she thought I should know. Her name is Dr. Simone Park, a family therapist who works specifically with adult children of enmeshed families. Kendall had seen her talk at a conference and thought of me immediately. I made an appointment. I almost canceled it twice. I went anyway. In our first session, I said, "I don't think I need therapy. I think I just had a very bad family and now I've left them and I'm fine." Dr. Park looked at me calmly and said, "That's not why people come to therapy. People come because they want to understand how they got there so they don't end up there again." I went back every Thursday for 6 months. The thing I learned, the thing that took me the longest to actually absorb, was that I hadn't been keeping my family afloat out of love. I'd been keeping them afloat out of fear. Fear that if I stopped, they'd collapse, and somehow that would be my fault. Fear that if I stopped, they'd confirm what a small, mean part of me had always worried was true. That I was only worth something to people when I was useful to them. Therapy didn't fix that fear in a clean, final way, but it named it. And naming it meant I could see it when it tried to climb back in through a different window. By summer, Ren had discovered frogs. The caterpillar phase was apparently over, and we had moved fully into amphibians. She cut one in the backyard of our apartment complex and named it Gerald, and then very responsibly released Gerald back where she found him because he has a family out there, Mom. I stood in the grass in my bare feet, watching her let Gerald go, and I thought about what Kendall had said months ago in that parking lot outside the diner. Not available. Responsible. The difference between those two words. I'd spent 8 years being available. Wren was teaching herself, one rescued frog at a time, how to be responsible for something without holding on to it forever. She is 6 years old, and she already understands something it took me 3 decades to learn. I got a promotion that August. Our clinic opened a pediatric wing and I was asked to lead the program. It meant a salary increase that made me stop and stare at my offer letter for a full minute. Not because it was extravagant, it wasn't, but because it was mine. Every dollar of it owed to no one. I took Wren to Redfish Lake that weekend to celebrate. We rented a little cabin and she collected pine cones, and I sat on the dock in the evening watching the sun go down over the Sawtooth Mountains, and I thought, this is it. This is the life. The quiet one. The real one. The legal process took nearly a year from start to finish. My mother accepted a plea agreement. 12 months of probation, mandatory repayment of the loan with interest, and a permanent mark on her credit record. No jail time. The district attorney told me the agreement was standard for a first offense of this type. I didn't contest it. I wasn't trying to put her in prison. I was trying to not have a fraudulent $12,000 loan attached to my name for the next 7 years. When the case closed, I got a letter from the credit union confirming that the account had been fully removed from my credit history and that my score had been restored. I filed it in my important documents folder right behind Wren's birth certificate. That night I made her favorite dinner. Macaroni and cheese with broccoli mixed in, because she somehow decided she loves broccoli, which I consider one of the great mysteries of parenthood. And we ate at the kitchen table, and she told me all about the book she was reading, and I listened to every word, and I didn't think about my family at all. People sometimes ask me if I regret it, not the fraud report. Nobody asks about that. They ask about the cutting off, the blocking, the silence. I understand the question. I was raised in a world where family is something you protect no matter what, where loyalty is measured in how much pain you're willing to absorb from the people who share your blood. I was raised to believe that walking away was the cruelest thing a person could do. But here's what I know now that I didn't know at 24 when I first started sending money every time a call came in. Walking away from people who are hurting you isn't cruelty. It's just clarity. It's knowing finally and completely what you're worth and refusing to accept less. My grandmother, the one we buried that March, the one with the loopy cursive and the birthday cards, she used to say something when things got hard. She put her hand on your face and say, "Baby, the people who deserve your love will show you in the way they treat you on an ordinary Tuesday. Not at Christmas, not when they need something. On a regular Tuesday when there's nothing in it for them." I think about that a lot. Wren and I have good Tuesdays now. I wake up in the morning and I make her lunch and I go to work and I help people relearn how to do the things their bodies forgot. And I come home and she tells me about frogs and butterflies and whatever she's decided is fascinating this week, and nobody calls with a crisis they expect me to fund. And nobody makes my daughter feel like a guest who wasn't properly invited. We are enough. The small, quiet life we've built on a regular Tuesday in Boise, Idaho, it is completely, entirely enough. And the people who made us feel otherwise, they got exactly what they earned. I have no regrets. I've thought a lot about the bread basket. It sounds small when I say it out loud. A basket of dinner rolls slid to the other side of a table. But Wren saw it, and she understood enough to look up at me and check whether she was supposed to cry. That's the part that never leaves me. Not my sister's words, not the room full of people who said nothing. Just my daughter's face, doing the math in real time on whether she was welcome somewhere. That moment was the result of something. It didn't appear out of nowhere. It was the end product of years of me funding a dynamic that rewarded cruelty and punished self-respect. Every time I wired money without being asked how I was doing, every time I accepted a phone call that started with, "I hate to ask," and ended with my bank account smaller and my sense of self a little more hollow, I participated in building the version of our family where my needs, and eventually my daughters, were optional. I'm not saying that to punish myself. I'm saying it because understanding how you got somewhere is the only honest way to leave. The thing about ethics, Real ethics, not the kind you perform for an audience, is that it's mostly invisible. It's the decision you make when nobody's watching and nothing immediate is at stake. For years, I told myself that sending money was the ethical choice, the responsible choice. But I was confusing ethics with appeasement. Ethics would have been saying the truth earlier. This dynamic is harmful, and I won't keep funding it. What I was actually doing was buying peace at the cost of my own dignity. That's not moral. That's just expensive. Intelligence didn't save me either, at least not at first. I'm educated. I'm good at my job. I can read a clinical assessment and catch things other people miss. But I couldn't see what Kendall saw in about 45 seconds on a phone call at 11 o'clock at night in a diner parking lot. That's because intelligence without self-knowledge is just a sharper tool pointed in the wrong direction. The smartest thing I did in this whole story wasn't reporting the fraud or blocking the numbers or hiring a therapist. It was listening when someone I trusted said something true about me that I hadn't let myself hear yet. Resilience is the one I'm still working on. I used to think resilience meant absorbing more. Taking the hit, staying at the table, not walking out. I had enormous capacity for that kind of endurance. But that's not resilience, that's just a high pain tolerance. Real resilience, the kind Wren shows me every time she lets Gerald the frog go because he has a family out there, that's knowing what you're responsible for and what you're not. That's holding something carefully and then releasing it when holding it no longer serves either of you. My mother made her choices. They produced consequences. I made mine. So did Nadia, who could have looked the other way. So did Kendall, who picked up on the third ring. Cause and effect isn't a punishment system. It's just the truth about how actions accumulate into outcomes over time. Wren is thriving. I sleep well. That's the whole story.